Hey everyone, it's Lisa Mears here for Scrapbook.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to let you all know that Scrapbook.com now carries Wow embossing powders, and I'm going to share some of them with you today and make a card. So here are just some of the products in the line of Wow embossing powders that are available at Scrapbook.com. And I first want to share with you the gold and the silver embossing powders. So this one is the polished silver superfine embossing powder. And this next one is the polished gold superfine embossing powder. These superfine embossing powders are great for sentiments and your detailed stamps. Next, I have the Twinkly Fizz Trio. And this trio of embossing powders has a pink, a purple, and a green. So I'll go ahead and pull these out here and show you what these look like. These are actually embossing glitters. So they just have the embossing powder with a hint of glitter in them, and you can see how much they sparkle. So this one here is the Strawberry Sparkle. This next one is called Minty Twinkle. You can see all of that beautiful glitter with that embossing powder. Look at all that sparkle, it's so pretty. And then this next one that I have is called Grape Fizz. I love that name. And then this one has a little bit of white mixed in with that purple. So beautiful. So I also have this Sparkles. This is the Cotton Candy. It says that it's inspired by Catherine Pooler, and this is a glitter. It is not an embossing powder, so you can use this with your wet glue or with double-sided tape and then just rub that glitter into that adhesive. I also have this Wow Mixed Media embossing brush, and this is actually new to me. You can see that it has that nail polish type of brush, and it's basically embossing ink, but it is in a bottle so that you can apply the ink in this brush format. This is perfect for die cut images that you want to emboss because you can quickly just take that brush and apply the ink to the die cuts and then put the embossing powder on top. And I'm going to show you how I use this in a little bit. So as I said at the beginning of this video, I am going to be making a card today, and some of the products I'll be using for my card, in addition to the embossing powders, will be these products here from Scrapbook.com. I have the small and the large Dainty Snowflake stamp sets. So this is the small stamp set, and it has the coordinating dies. There are 6 small snowflakes with different designs, and then the large snowflakes have 3 different stamps with the coordinating dies. So I love these stamps because number one, I love snowflakes, and these coordinate together because you have small and large. And I'm also going to be bringing in this Merry Christmas cover plate, which fits perfectly on the front of an A2 size card base. So you guessed it, we will be making a Christmas card today, but you can also use the techniques that I'm going to show you for any type of occasion. And before I continue, I do want to let you know that all products that I use today are available at Scrapbook.com, and the product links will be down in the description box below. So I'm going to start out by stamping the snowflakes, and I took a large snowflake and 2 small snowflakes, and I just line them up here on this white cardstock. I did put my cardstock in my Misti, and I am using that beautiful rose gold Misti that's only available at Scrapbook.com. I'm going to take my Pink and Main Magic anti-static brush, and I'll add some powder to that white cardstock. I love using this brush because it has the powder in the bottom of the brush, and it does come out when you press the top of that brush onto the cardstock. And adding the powder just helps eliminate the embossing powder from sticking where there's no ink. So I am going to be using my Versamark embossing ink pad. Because I'm doing stamping, I did not want to use that embossing brush that I showed you at the beginning of this video, just because that does come out really thick and I did not want a really thick layer on these stamps. So I did use the Versamark ink to ink up those stamps, and now I'm just using my Stampendable stamping tool to press those stamps down onto my cardstock. So I did ink them up a few times, and now I'm going to remove that cardstock from the Misti, and I'm going to start with the Strawberry Sparkle embossing powder. So I love this pink embossing powder. It is so pretty and sparkly. I'm just going to sprinkle it over my snowflakes. And I do have a piece of cardstock there at the bottom to catch all of that extra embossing powder, because all that extra embossing powder is going right back in the jar because I can use that for another project. So next I'm going to take out my heat tool and I will heat set that embossing powder onto that cardstock, and look at all of that sparkle. Look how pretty that is. Next, I will repeat that process with 3 more snowflake stamps. So again, I'm going to take 1 large and 2 small snowflakes, line them up there on my cardstock, and once again, I will add powder to that cardstock. Once the powder's added, I'll go ahead and add my Versamark ink to my stamps. Make sure you're using a very juicy ink pad. You want to make sure that Versamark ink really gets into those stamps. And then I'll press those down onto the cardstock. I will reapply ink and stamp out a second time. And I will say, before removing this cardstock from the Misti, I know it's hard to see the ink on here because it's a clear ink, but try and really get down and look at your cardstock and make sure you can see those lines before removing the cardstock from the Misti, because you may have to apply more ink just to get a solid stamp. So this time around I'm adding the Minty Twinkle. It's so pretty, beautiful mint colored embossing glitter. And if there's any excess, you can just use a paintbrush and just flick off that excess embossing glitter. I'll go ahead and put the excess back in the bottle, and then I'll take my heat tool and I will heat set this. And look how pretty that is. Now I did mess up just a little bit there. I didn't get a full coverage on one of those snowflakes, but that is quite okay. The way that I'm going to make my card, it's not going to be a big deal. So just for the sake of time, I did remove the portion of the stamping on this third set of snowflakes. But this time around, I'm using the Grape Fizz embossing glitter. It's kind of like a lavender. It's a light purple, so pretty, has a little hint of white in it. So all of my stamping is done, and now I just need to take out the dies and die cut these snowflakes, and I'll set them aside, and I'm going to move on to the next step, which is die cutting my Merry Christmas A2 cover plate. So I added some white cardstock with my die on top, and I'm just running it through my die cutting machine, and then I'll just remove all of that excess white cardstock from the die. So you could totally just use this die cut it in any color cardstock you want, put it on a card base, and that would make for such an easy and quick Christmas card. But I'm taking this a step further because I'm showing you how to use these embossing powders and the embossing brush. So what I wanted to do here is I wanted to take the Merry Christmas words that are on here, and I wanted to add some embossing powder to just those words out of some gold embossing powder. So what I've done is I take some mint tape and I've masked off the edges of that die cut piece just so that the words are shown. And then I'm going to take my embossing brush and I'm going to paint on that embossing liquid. This is so easy to do. So I'm just using it like I would a bottle of nail polish, popping it in the liquid, making sure that I do take off a lot of the excess because you don't want it too thick on your die cut, and then just brushing it on until the entire die cut piece has that embossing liquid on top. So you can do this with any die that you have, and if you wanted to add embossing powder to it, you can just take this brush and you can paint it on. Or even if you had a stamp and maybe you missed a tiny part of the stamp with your ink pad, you can always take this embossing brush and just get a little bit of the liquid on the tip of the brush to apply on that one part of the stamp that's really not stamping well for you, and that would also work amazingly. So here I'm just covering this up completely, and then once I've done that, I will go ahead and remove all of that mint tape. And then I'm going to sprinkle the polished gold superfine embossing powder over both words Merry Christmas. Now as I sprinkle this on, I am going to get a lot of the embossing powder down on that cardstock. So you can see I have a big mess of embossing powder there, but that's why I have the cardstock, because all of that embossing powder is going right back in the jar. So don't forget, if you do this, to make sure you have that cardstock underneath so you can save all of that embossing powder. So next I'm going to take out my heat tool and I will go ahead and heat set this. This will take a little bit longer than what you see me doing. I am actually going to skip over some of this because I didn't want this to be too long, but you definitely want to make sure that you spend some time applying your heat to your cardstock, because there's a lot of embossing powder here, and you'll be able to tell when it's melted because you'll actually be able to see it melting before your eyes. Now there are some spots there that I did miss, and that's okay because I will be coming back here in just a little bit and adding more of the ink and more embossing powder to get those few spots that I did miss. So I had some extra embossing ink on this mat that I had my die cut on. So I'm just taking a paintbrush, coming in and grabbing some of that embossing ink that was sitting on this mat. I didn't want to waste it. And then I'm just painting over some of the white spots that I missed. And then I'll repeat the process by adding some of the embossing powder over those spots, and I'll heat set that. Now keep in mind that my video is a little bit faster pace than normal, and it did take me a little bit longer than what you actually see here on this video. So make sure you spend time on your heat setting to make sure it's all set. So remember how I told you that that embossing liquid goes on pretty thick? Well, I want to show you here on the edge where it did go on pretty thick, and it actually seeped onto the side of that cardstock. So if that does happen, just die cut that die again, and then just use your scissors to snip off the words Merry Christmas. And once you snip off all of those words and detach them from the frame, you can use that frame to add right back to your die cut that you embossed. So now that I have the frame, I'll just put glue on the back and I'll add it to the one that I have the gold embossed Merry Christmas, and that will just cover it up. So there's my frame. Look at all that beautiful shiny gold lettering. I love that. So I'm going to make this a shaker card, and I have a piece of acetate. I'm just going to apply glue to the back of my frame and put very light glue on the letters, because I don't want that glue to seep out from the letters, because if it does, it's going to get all over your acetate and it's not going to look very nice. So if you are using glue, which I do suggest a very fine tip glue bottle like I have here, and just put a very light strip of glue on all of those letters. That way you can keep that attached securely to the acetate if you wanted to make it a shaker card. If you don't want to make a shaker card, you can always skip this step, but those of you who follow me know that I love shaker cards, so I couldn't pass this one up. So I'm just using some acrylic blocks to hold this down to the acetate. So it's just holding the die cut down with the glue until I get a really good seal on that glue. And then I'm going to use my scissors and just snip off the edges of the acetate. You can see all the excess there, and it's a very straight snip with your scissors. If you wanted to use a paper trimmer, you can do that too. So here I just added the dot on the eye, and now my frame is all set to go. So now I'm ready to add my snowflakes to my card. So I have cut down a piece of white cardstock to measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm going to arrange my snowflakes on this card panel. You can see I'm using the Scrapbook.com stack and sort tray to keep all of my die cuts in. These trays are so handy when you have extra die cuts, or even if you have a project that has a lot of dies, you can put your dies in there to keep them all in one place while you're working on your project. It's such a great desk organizer. So I'm just putting my snowflakes where I want them on this card, and once I have them exactly where I want them, I will go ahead and glue them down. I do have the snowflakes extending off the edges of that card panel, so I do want to mention that if you had any snowflakes that maybe did not stamp correctly, maybe you had some ends of the snowflakes that you didn't get that embossing powder on, you can always put those ends on the edge of this card panel and let those extend off, because nobody will ever know that those did not stamp correctly because you're cutting off the ends anyway. I'm going to use the Scrapbook.com Premium Foam Adhesive Roll. Look at this roll of adhesive. It is so big, and this is perfect for adding your double-sided thick adhesive to your shaker cards, and this one fits perfectly along the edge of this frame. So I just turned my card panel over, so I'm looking at the back side, and I'm adding my adhesive foam along all of those edges. When you make shaker cards, you want to make sure that the foam touches the foam. So on one end, it touches the other end. You don't want to have any gaps, because if you do, well, your shaker pieces will fall out of those gaps. Okay, so next I'm going to add the cotton candy sparkles in the center, right on top of my snowflake card panel. Just adding them there in the center, and then I'm going to add my Merry Christmas A2 cover plate die right on top. So I'm just removing the backing off of that adhesive. I'm going to add a little bit more sprinkles because they're just so pretty and I can't resist that color and all that sparkle. And then I'm going to go ahead and put that panel right on top. And it does fit perfectly because the panel is the same size as that snowflake panel that I cut down. So they're both A2 in size. They measure 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now I'm going to take some of these smaller snowflakes and I'm going to decorate the front of my card with this. They are going to extend off the panel, which is not a big deal. I think that looks super pretty. I did have some extra snowflakes that I stamped off camera at the beginning of this video, and some of the snowflakes, they did not take on the ink very well. You can see with this green one in particular, it has some parts of it that do not have the embossing powder. So that is a perfect example of using those snowflakes here on this card, because you can just put the part that does not have the embossing powder over the edge and still use part of it, because I'm going to just snip off the excess anyway. So don't throw away those stamps that don't stamp all the way when you're using that clear Versamark ink, because you can use them for projects like this. So here I'm going to turn this panel over and snip off the excess of the snowflakes. Now that green one I can't use, but that purple one I can use, and I'm going to take that purple one that I just snipped off and I'm going to glue it so that it is at the top of this card. So I'm just going to line the flat edge that I snipped off with the flat edge of the card and just press that down. Next, I'm going to add that to an A2 size card base. And I have one additional tip for you. So the glitter that we put inside of this panel was very thin. So it's a very good chance that some of it could leak out with these tiny little gaps between your foam adhesive. And if that happens, just take your glue, shove some glue in those tiny little holes, and once that dries, it will be so secure that none of that glitter is going to fall or seep out of those small tiny openings. So thank you again for joining me today, and remember, all supplies will be linked down in the description box below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.